It's not live yet.
Refresh.
We have 19 people waiting, but it's not live yet.
It says live 13, 14.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hi. So I am Christina Zakaria, and I am one of the organizers for ProductTank Rotterdam. This is actually our kickoff event as well within ProductTank Rotterdam. And we have the pleasure to have some very amazing guests today. But before we go there, we also have Lucia, who is the other host of our ProductTank. And I would like to allow her to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lucia. I am a product lead within mobility consultancy company. And we started this journey last October with ProductTank after attending Mind the Product conference. And we are very excited to have you guys here in our kickoff event for the Rotterdam local chapter of ProductTank. With us, Janna and Stephen. Janna is actually co-founder of Mind the Product and ProductPad. And maybe you can introduce yourself, Janna.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Lucia, thank you for the warm welcome. As you know, I'm one of the co-founders of Mind the Product, which is the big community of product managers all around the world. We run the Mind the Product conference, and we have the events, the articles, the videos, all the information you could ever need around being a product manager. From the crew at Mind the Product, happy World Product Day to everybody. And I'm also one of the founders of ProductPad, which is software for product people. So as you can imagine, I was a product person before getting into all of this, and started finding product people who needed tools and wanted to get together and share a drink and share a story. And so that's how I got into what I do. Thank you,
Janna. And then we have Stephen Culligan. He's a head of product at Glofox and current EMEA ProductTank coordinator. Stephen, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to talk briefly today about my career in product management, how I've navigated that career, and some of the lessons I've learned along the way. So a very general talk that hopefully other people can learn from the mistakes I've made. But I also want to briefly introduce ProductTank as well and what that's meant to me over the last few years. And why I'm so excited that ProductTank Rotterdam is starting today on World Product Day of all days. So really excited to be here. Happy Product Day, World Product Day. Christina, Lucia, do you want me to start now?
Yes, Stephen, please go ahead. Of course.
Perfect.
Maybe if I can just mention, so we're gonna also have a Q&A after each talk, and Christina and I will moderate. So please shoot your questions in the chat, and we'll select a few and ask them at the end of the talk, if that's okay, Stephen and Janna.
Perfect.
Yeah, great.
Great, let's get started. So my name is Stephen Culligan. I help product tanks across EMEA to get started and to grow. And today we have about 84 product tanks across EMEA, and I think this is this could be the 85th. So congratulations, Rotterdam. In my full-time job, I'm head of product at Glofox, where we power the fitness industry. So any big gym or fitness boutique, you'll probably find Glofox software in it, helping members to book classes and get the most out of their gyms. What I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years is actually building teams to build great products. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and how I got to there. First, what's Mind the Product? I think Janna already mentioned, but Mind the Product is something I've gotten a lot of value out of in my career. You probably know it from the blog, where I've learned an awful lot over the years, but also from the conferences where you get to see pretty amazing people talk, but also meet other like-minded people who can help you in your career. That is Mind the Product. That's Mind the Product, but it's also ProductTank. So what is ProductTank? ProductTank is this. It's the free meetup for product managers and product interested people worldwide. This is actually ProductTank Buenos Aires that I got to visit, and Guido there speaking to the crowd. I got to visit last year, and ProductTank is in over 200 cities worldwide now. So if we ever get the chance to travel again, I highly recommend you check in on your local ProductTank in that area. And also, if you're interested, worldproductday.com has all of the events that are happening today, of which there are over 50 on World Product Day. So I hope that this is the first of many events for ProductTank Rotterdam. And now I'm going to speak about my product management career. So we're going to touch on the career ladder for a product manager, the product development lifecycle that most good agile companies work through, and the lessons I've learned along the way, which will hopefully help you avoid the same mistakes that I've made in my career and help you advance through that career ladder quicker. So the career ladder, one of the best representations of the career ladder from a pretty amazing product person is Melissa Perry's. And she likes to think about it across three different spectrums: the tactical, the operational, and the strategic. And typically as an associate PM where I started, you would be doing a lot of implementation. So your day is mostly spent with the team delivering typically the software that you're trying to build. And then you move up to product manager level, which is a little bit more strategic. You might be taking a slightly longer time horizon into the decisions that you're making and working more with executives until you get to senior PM, which is very much more of a strategic role. You're still working day-to-day with the team, but you're expected to have a lot more influence on the outcome of what it is that you're working on rather than just the day-to-day implementation. And that's the individual contributor track, where you're probably not really managing other people or helping others to grow necessarily. You're kind of focused on your own role. After that, you move into the more executive suite, the directors, VP, and CPO roles, which become a lot more strategic and a lot more operational, and that you're probably managing teams or multiple teams at this stage. And that's where I find myself in my career today, somewhere between the director and VP role as head of product at Glofox. And I'm almost doing no tactical implementation anymore. This is pretty early in a representation of what a product manager's career is and can be. And I've talked to many product managers that haven't necessarily followed this route, but it's been true for me. And I think it's becoming more and more common as product becomes more mature as a department or as a practice within organizations. So the product development lifecycle I'll touch on very quickly, and then we'll talk about where I've worked across this in my career. So most, I think, good agile teams are now working to a process that looks something like this, where you align at the start with project goals and you bring your stakeholders and your team together to dissect those things and make sure that everyone agrees or at least disagrees and commits to solving those goals. Then you would move into more discovery phase, where you're looking at multiple problems, the best ways to solve them, until ultimately you've got something before coding that you're pretty happy with, that you've validated with customers, that you think will achieve the goals of the project or the product. And then you move into the development life cycle itself, development, design, testing, working with engineers and designers to actually build something, and releasing iteratively to make decisions on measuring the impact, and then make decisions on whether to grow, pivot, or kill. And this is a pretty typical product development life cycle we see across the technology industry today. So we've covered the career ladder and the product development life cycle. I want to talk about the 4 things that I've learned that have been incredibly important for me to grow as a product manager and get to the point that I am in my career. So lesson 1 is release early and often. And I originally called this getting feedback quickly, because that's what it's really about. You have to get feedback from the right people as quickly as possible in order to make sure that you're going in the right direction, that you're building the right product. So what did this look for me early in my career? And this is where I made a big mistake. So this is me, a much younger version of me in 2012, and I'm an associate product manager. I was working on a team that was building digital television. So anywhere that a consumer wanted to consume TV on their phone, on tablet, set-top box via the TV, that was the product that we were building for a pretty large telco in Europe. And the goal for them was to capture more of the wallet share of the consumer who were probably spending that at other telcos. And one of the big things they thought that would entice more consumers to come to them for a more rounded experience was the introduction of television. And as an associate PM, I didn't really question the thinking behind that. I wasn't part of the strategy in making those decisions, but I was working as part of the technology team as an associate PM on tactical day-to-day things to implement that. And where that was in the product development lifecycle was really starting at the roadmap planning stage. So most of the decisions on what and why and how were kind of made at that stage. It was more about putting the pieces together and all the different intricacies within the organization to figure out how to deliver it. And I won't go too much into roadmaps today. I think Janna we'll probably cover a little bit of that, and she's definitely the master of that with ProdPad. So I'm really excited to learn more from Janna about that. But what my roadmap looked like at that stage, and foolishly, in hindsight, was this. And really, it was a Gantt chart trying to piece all the different pieces of the puzzle together and showing the dependencies between them. The milestones, and how when one piece of work could finish, another team could pick it up. And I've learned throughout my career, something I didn't know then, was how much of a misrepresentation of the work a Gantt chart really is. And it didn't allow us to really solve the problems we were trying to solve and get the feedback that we needed about the product as a whole to make sure that it could be successful. So one of the things about this product was that we were working in a waterfall style. So we were delaying the customer validation for a very long time, which I've since found out, and is the point of this lesson, that is something you should never do as a product manager. You should always try and release early and often and get feedback as quickly as possible. So what it looked like for digital TV that we were building, we had about a 2-year time horizon. And we weren't going to get any validation from customers until those 2 years are over. It seems crazy saying this out loud now, but that was the thinking at the time, and that's how we thought we would be successful. So we went on the build spree. We started with the Android app. It was one of the easier things to build. We then also started building the set-top box capability in the background. We then went on to the iPhone app, and we didn't release any of these things. We were just storing up these banks of releases until we got to the very, very end, and we released it all as one. And it was a huge mistake. But the reason it was a huge mistake in this particular instance was of a risk that we didn't foresee and would have been helped to mitigate if we had released more often. And that was the launch of Netflix. And all of a sudden, our business, our whole business case, our strategy was kind of dead in the water. We didn't have the capability to defend against Netflix, and we certainly didn't have the product. We had only built parts of the product. We hadn't released it to any customers. We'd built up no goodwill with any of our customers at this point, and Netflix pretty much destroyed our business model overnight. So what should we have done? I think one of the things in hindsight, we probably still would have done the project. The way in which we released and how I as a product manager would have went about getting feedback would have been significantly different. So we would have looked at when the Android app was ready, we would have released that, maybe an early version to a subset of customers, get feedback, start creating early advocates for the product, similarly with the iPhone, and continue to iterate. This would allow us to create some advocates for our product early, and at least would have allowed us to have something in the market to compete with Netflix rather than waiting another 6 to 12 months before we'd have a proposition that could compete with Netflix. So we made a huge mistake in this, in that we didn't release early and often. And the product I'd worked on for 12 months was a pretty big failure. And that felt terrible as a product manager. So I brought that lesson into the next thing that I did. And this next lesson is around killing features and why that's important and the outcome it can have for your business. So this is me in 2015. And at this stage, I'm a product manager. I'm working on a digital peer-to-peer currency exchange. So a marketplace for currency. Someone has euro, someone has dollars. You can exchange that online, and it's a much better deal for you as the consumer rather than going through the bank. And I'm a lot more strategic at this stage, still pretty early in my career, but I have the influence to impact things like how should we release, when should we release, and what sort of feedback should we be looking for? And I was able to take that into this next lesson. So we went a little bit further back in the product development lifecycle as a product manager. Now we still had pretty interested executives that had a lot of ideas about what we should build, but I was able to work with a team of engineers and designers to validate some of those things before we got to actually roadmap planning and implementation. So we spent a lot more time with customers in early prototypes without coding anything to validate that it actually solved for the goals that the executives were trying to achieve. And this was our product. This was what the marketplace looked like. This was the moment of satisfaction and value for our customers. And as you can see, it's pretty complicated. There was about 15 different decisions a customer is being asked to make on this page. And also, I would describe that as 15 different features they were being asked to interact with. And as the product manager for this startup, for the core product, I set about trying to convince my stakeholders and my executives that this was something that we needed to change. And the way I did that was going through some of the framing that Intercom had helped me with before. And this is a grid of how your customers interact with your features. So you can see on the y-axis, you've got time. So is it all the time, most of the time, some of the time, very little of the time? And then on the x-axis, you've got the number of customers. So few of your customers, some, most, or all. And it's the guide that Intercom have is that if all of your customers all of the time are using this particular feature, then great. It's something you should continue to iterate on, or at least make sure that it's front and center in your product. If there's very little of the time and few of the people, then this is a great candidate to kill that part of the product or those features. And actually what we had was something that few of the people were using, but all of the time. So we had a very small subset of our customers that were using our product to its full effect. And this was a big problem that I wanted to help solve. And it was related to how the usability, the number of features that people were being asked to interact with. And that was the problem. So we used this grid and we set about mapping out, this is the team. So we set about mapping out where, with the data team and trying to inform this as much as possible, which features were being used and how they were being used. And this is where we got to. So we framed a different solution, we tested it with users, and we reduced the number of features that you could interact with from 15 down to a decision point, and then 1 or 2 follow-ups that would help you get to the moment of value. And we went from something like 10% of our customer base interacting with the most important part of our product to about 40 or 50% and way less abandonment. So just by mapping things out and understanding the interaction with features, you can start to make the case to evolve your product, to kill things within your product. And the lesson we learned was that killing features makes it easier for your customers to use your product, but also led to better business outcomes where customers were using the most important part of our product in the way it was intended, in a simple way, which made them more sticky as customers, and also allowed us as a technology organization to move quicker without having as much debt to deal with because we've killed off parts of our product. And so lesson 3 comes from my next stop as a product manager. And as a product manager consultant for the last few years, I think I've really learned that skill of making things easy to understand and helping the rest of the business to come along with what you think is right to achieve. And we saw that with the intercom model that I used in the previous lesson, but also there's a lot more out there. And this is where I want to encourage you to look across the Mind the Product blog and other great product resources to find ways of framing things so that you can be more persuasive and influential in your businesses and allow you to get to the next step of your career. So this one is something I've used a lot in my career. It's the Kano model, and it's a way of mapping out the amount of effort you should be expending. So the x-axis and how that impacts your customers' the happiness. So on the y-axis. And one of the products that I've used to map this model pretty well is something that Spotify has. And it's a product at Spotify that I've gotten a lot of value out of called Discover Weekly. So this is the ability to, or the Spotify generates a set of songs into a playlist that they think you will like every Monday morning based on your previous listening habits. And when I saw this in 2015, I thought this was the best possible thing that could ever happen. I was so delighted by this product. And you can see on the green axis, there was probably some product manager in Spotify saying we need to spend more effort on this because people are getting a lot of happiness out of this. And it was true. But over time, I would say by about 2017, the more effort they were spending on, I wasn't becoming more and more happy than the effort they were spending, but I was still becoming a little bit happier. They were probably solving things like songs appearing in my playlist twice in 2 weeks, some mild frustrations I had, but the product was still pretty great, and they were spending a little bit more time on it. And what I guess Spotify have probably gotten to at this stage, and some product manager I hope has made the case at this stage, is that it's now become more of an expectation of the product. The more effort they spend on it, they probably won't make any more people any happier. So they should probably stop spending effort on this particular initiative and move on to something else, spend their time, money, resources, people elsewhere. And this is a model I've used in the past to help me make the case in the businesses I've been in about the amount of effort and time we're putting into particular parts of the product. So there's plenty of models out there like this. The Kano model is just one, but it helps you to frame things for the rest of the business and helps you to make better decisions and influence those around you a little bit more. So lesson 3 is about framing things so that people can understand them better and become more influential in your career. And then finally, I think the thing that I've learned that is most important as a product person is to always start at the problem and always discover. And I think this is really, really easy to say, and there's a lot of good materials about discovery out there and starting with the problem as a product person. But I struggled to make sense of what this meant earlier in my career. And now I try to apply this lens to everything I do, and I have a lot more bank of experiences to apply this to. So as a product manager consultant and as a senior PM, I've worked on lots of products over the last few years. And this is Shruti, a very good friend and colleague of mine as an engineer from my days as a product management consultant. As a senior PM, I had a lot more of a strategic role, so I could be a little bit more influential. I'd sort of flex that muscle of making things more easy and digestible for people to understand, which grew my confidence in my ability and also gained trust with the others that are working with me. So I could be more strategic, more long-term in my thinking, and more influential on changing and adapting the outcomes and the goals that we're trying to achieve with a particular product. As a senior PM, though, I'm still tactical. I'm still day-to-day. I'm still working with the team, but I can just have a bit more impact on the outcome that we're trying to achieve. And as part of the product development lifecycle, I now get to make an argument for pretty much bringing everything back to the alignment stage. If an executive thinks that there's an initiative that's particularly important, great, but let's start with the problem. Let's give the team enough time to discover with real customers, with real users, and talk to stakeholders to make sure that what it is that we're being tasked with is the right thing to go after. So bringing things back to the problem. And there's one particular product that I think I got to do this particularly well with the team I was on. And I want to talk about that today. So these are typically the type of meetings that I find myself in these days, with a lot of important executives and technologists, and with a lot of stickies, trying to move people back to alignment and discussing what the problem is before we jump to solutions. And it's this team here that I think I was most successful with over the last few years. This is Brandon, Dan, and Mike, and they are some of my favorite stakeholders and team I've ever worked with. They had a really clear goal in mind, and they had a solution that had already solidified in their head, but they were really open to changing that. And they were in the healthcare space. They came to us and they kind of jumped to the end of the solution framing with something they wanted to build, but they were very open to us moving backwards and talking more about the goals that they had. So to give you a brief overview, they ran specialty healthcare pharmacies in hospitals in the United States. And their goal was to take better care of more patients. So the thing they found was that when a patient gets their prescription filled at the hospital pharmacy, it's A, more likely to be filled, and B, more likely to be correctly filled because the doctor and the pharmacist already have a relationship together because they're part of the same healthcare group. So they ran these pharmacies, and what they discovered was that a lot of the patients in the hospital weren't coming to them for their medication. And what they thought they wanted as executives, and this is kind of their vision that they had at the start, this isn't the real image, this is pulled from Google, but it's a sort of an executive dashboard that would pull in all the information about the success or failure of their particular pharmacies and help them to make better decisions at a strategic level on what to do. But rather than just build it directly, we went back to the goal that they had, which was serve more patients better. And we interviewed a lot of the people who worked in those pharmacies until we distilled it down to this real problem statement that they had, which was, as a pharmacist, I actually miss a lot of my appointments with patients because the information is hard to find and often wrong. So although the executives thought that if they built a dashboard of KPIs, they would start to understand this problem a lot more, we actually jumped ahead of them and just talked to the people in the pharmacies to understand the real problem. And this is the framing that we came back with, which led us to a slightly different solution, which was more of an appointment and historical log of records. And by doing this, we helped the people who mattered most, which was the pharmacist, to connect with the patients as quickly as possible in a real way and make sure they actually turned up to the appointments that was a real appointment and allowed them to make sure that the patient got their medication from the hospital pharmacy, which was pretty cool. And it resulted in my boss's boss's boss, Michael Dell at the time, who ultimately the company rolled up to. But he tweeted about the outcome of this project. And the thing I really like is the quote is, the amount of time that pharmacy staff have to interact with patients has roughly quadrupled thanks to automations. So just by talking to the pharmacy staff and framing the problem in the right way, we quadrupled the amount of time that they could spend with patients by providing a pretty stripped back, straightforward solution. And allowing them to get to better patient outcomes, more patients getting their prescription filled by the pharmacy in the hospital, and then more robust business for Shields Healthcare. And this was pretty awesome feeling. And it was because we went all the way back to the problem and were given a little bit of time to figure out what the real problem we were solving was before getting into the solution. And that's lesson 4. And that's it. So I will stop and hand it over to you, Christina and Lucia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Very insightful. We have one question so far and one from my side. So the question is, How do you start creating early advocates for the product? Is it via the value they might get from the product, or do you mean more direct action?
I think action. So one of the things we try to do, and I've tried to do as a product management consultant, is to start showing the outcome of the research that we're doing as quickly as possible. So although you might say, hey, we need 2 or 3 weeks to perform this research and figure out what the right thing to build is or the right problem to go after is, if you can bring stakeholders into that process in a way that they can understand as quickly as possible, then you'll start to create advocates for the process, which will give you more trust to then start continuing that process. So I highly recommend talking to users as early as possible and then surfacing those insights as quickly as possible to your executives and bringing them into that rather than keeping them outside and just informed.
Thank you. Any specific practical tips on what is just the right time to kill or pivot something? For me personally, it's still one of the most difficult things to do.
I think like 60% of the products I've probably worked on have been a failure. So I would say kill your product as often as possible, but make sure that you're going through the right validation steps in order to make that decision. So it's not necessarily about when to kill a product. I think it's about making sure you're getting the right validation, which will lead you to the correct decision. I think that can take different amounts of time depending on what you're working on. But as long as you're validating with customers qualitatively and you're looking into the expected outcome quantitatively and measuring that, then you can make an informed decision about that.
Thank you. Makes sense. Christina, do you have anything else? Otherwise, we can move to Janna, I think. Nothing else from the audience? So.
Janna, yeah, we don't have anything else. Not coming from the audience yet.
I'm really excited. Good luck, Janna.
Okay, great. Stephen, I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm excited to talk to everybody today. Stephen sort of talked about the wider life cycle and some really important things about making sure to fit in discovery and looking at how you even kill features. So I'm even going to talk about sort of different ends of the life cycle. But in particular, I'm going to be talking about how to manage products once they start getting big and hairy and more mature, because it's easy to manage a nice and simple new product, but it becomes much more difficult as that product line matures. So let me share my screen and we can get going with this. Let's see how this goes. Share this screen. Okay. Excellent. And let's get my presenter view up so I can see where I am. And so I'm doing a little bit of a test today. You might notice the words along the bottom. It's the PowerPoint's built in subtitles. Whoops. And now we're looking at something else. Don't want to show that. Hold on a second.
No worries. We're good on time.
Okay. So what I want to do is share.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay. Doing this again. Bear with me. Share that one.
Yeah. It's working?
Okay. I love that you can see my thinking as well as I go through this all. It's reading it all out back to me. Okay. Now I want to look at this one myself. Oh, I see what it's doing. It's put that over there. There we are. Okay.
Yeah. I can see your screen.
Okay. Great. And that. Okay, and you can still see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, we're off to a flying start. Okay. Hello, everybody. So as you know, my name is Janna Bastow. Let's see how the subtitle gets it. And it got it. Ta-da! That was the first time it got it. All right. So you probably all know this product lifecycle chart. And while many of us are familiar with the uphill battle and the grind involved in getting traction in any growth towards that product market fit, the launch and the growth phases represent a small fraction of the overall life of a product. You know, that MVP that everyone talks about, It happens right here, right at the introduction of your product. However, most companies you work for aren't going to be working on greenfield, brand new products. Most of us are working on products that we've adopted from a previous team. It already has a pile of existing customers and constraints. It has a good chunk of tech debt, probably a messy backlog of features and bugs that, we'll never be able to fully work through. And yet, if you're looking at the volume of sales, it's in the maturity stage where most of the money is made. And it's also where churn really hurts. It's easy to mask an ugly churn rate with high growth, especially in a frothy new market. But once you've saturated the market, your churn problem really starts to kick in. So it's at this maturity level where this starts to bite back. And yet, if you look on Medium and everywhere else, you'll mostly read about launching products and optimizing for growth. There's a lot less shared out there about managing products that are reaching maturity or, God forbid, the decline stages. Which is a shame, because it's exactly at those stages when things start to get hard. So in the growth stage, your team is focused on getting product market fit and doing whatever it takes to get traction and prove your product has a place in the world. Well, in the maturity stage, you've got existing and new users to build for. You've got built-in constraints and technical complexity, politics and people to work around. In short, maturity comes with problems. For example, you might find that you've become a feature factory. In the early stages, each new feature you built brought more downloads, more signups and sales, and blasted you forward beyond the competition. You were hyper agile and you pushed code out to new features weekly, if not daily, and you outpaced your competitors and you knew how to move fast. But in the later stages, the goal isn't just to deliver features. In fact, each new feature you deliver weighs you down, resulting in a Frankenstein of a product. So those old habits you have begin to lead you astray. And so focus on objectives instead of features. Inherently, teams understand this. They know that a big pile of features isn't what their customers want or what their business needs, and yet it's a pattern that happens over and over again. I blame the roadmap. Now, roadmaps aren't inherently bad. In fact, they can be a great tool for communicating your product strategy, and yet a badly done roadmap can pave the way to a feature-filled product death. And so I implore you all to do this with me. Ditch your timeline roadmap. I know this format makes you look great today. Your board and your bosses certainly love when you can give them this level of certainty, but it's setting you up for failure. See, if you deconstruct this format of the roadmap, you basically get a chart that maps out time versus things to do. And you have time on the x-axis, creating this timeline. And at first, it seems pretty easy and intuitive to use, especially in the short term. But the further out you plan and the more you put on there, the harder it becomes to manage. And because that timeline sits at the top, always marching forward, no matter what you put on the roadmap, everything includes a due date and a time estimate just by the format of the roadmap. And as a result, you end up with a big pile of features, a big pile of deadlines, and all based on this big pile of assumptions. The first assumption that you've made with this format is that you know how long each of these is going to take. Now, this might be easy for the stuff you've already broken down into more detail and had the developers give some more detailed estimates. But the further down the list you go, the less clarity you've actually got. You're also assuming that nothing else is going to come in and mess up your timeline. No changes in the market, no new competitors, no fresh ideas coming from customers, no need for iteration. You're also assuming that each of these features will work as soon as they launch. So if you put 3 weeks in to build that new checkout page, then at the end of 3 weeks, it'll be converting exactly as expected, right? And so you can move on to the next thing. And by explicitly adding these features to the timeline, you're assuming that each of these features should definitely exist, that they form part of the strategy and therefore should be codified. And at the end of the day, you're making one big, dangerous assumption that nothing is going to change. So, what could go wrong? Well, You've got these made up release dates that's basically forcing your developers on this stressful march to launch on time, giving your sales and customers expectations that you can't meet, while missing opportunities in the market and often leading you to downright build the wrong things. And this leads to you being a sad product manager. And we don't want any of this. So is there a better way? Of course there is. I'm going to get you out of the feature factory in 3 steps. So first step, start with your vision. If you don't have one of these agreed with the team, just go back to the drawing board. So this is a format that I like using, but you can use whatever format works for you. You might recognize this one from Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. It was originally an elevator pitch template, but it asks the right questions for product vision. Who are you building for, and what's going to set you apart from your competition? Then map out your objectives. These should be outcome-based goals that are tied to your company strategy. You might know these as KPIs or OKRs, or like us, you might just call them objectives. It doesn't really matter what you call them, just use what works for you and your team. The point is that they act as guardrails, and they keep everyone pointing in the right direction and working on the right things. The important thing is to focus on outcome over output. Measuring output is counting how many story points have been completed. Measuring outcomes means you're tying results back to the original company level goals. And finally, change your timeline for time horizons. So instead of a single line marching forward, think in terms of these 3 buckets. In the first bucket, current or now, you're granular about your focus and your scope. This is the stuff that's being prototyped, tested, and built right now. Whereas stuff in the future column is less about specific initiatives, but more about outlining problems that you think need to be solved in order to fulfill your vision. These are assumptions to be validated. And that's the key. Your roadmap is for validation. I see your roadmap as a prototype for your strategy. Just as you might validate a feature by drawing up some paper prototypes and showing them to your customer, then starting again based on that feedback, your roadmap is a starting point for your conversation around what needs to be included in your strategy. And so put those 3 things together, your vision, your objectives, and your time horizons, and you get a lean roadmap. Each of these blocks that you see are initiatives or problems to be solved, and each is linked to a specific objective. So here's one popular configuration, and another layout that's very similar, but groups the cards by objective or the problem that you're looking to solve. The value of this roadmap format is that it takes the focus off building features and hitting delivery dates and helps your team strive towards solving problems together. And speaking of problems, nothing stifles innovation like a to-do list as long as your arm. And yet this is a state that so many teams get stuck in. Every all-in-one backlog has some massive, bloated, vertigo-inducing column of tickets that are lined up to do next. It stresses out the development team who are looking down the barrel of a million upcoming yet undefined tasks, and it freaks out the non-tech team who are just wondering why none of their ideas ever seem to see the light of day. So the solution for this is simple. Break your backlog into 2 parts, the product backlog and the development backlog. Backlog is a broad term, so let's be more specific. The development backlog is the stack of specs that are ready and approved for dev and are just waiting for someone to start building. It should be relatively short and tidy, allows the developers to focus on the task at hand. Your developers can pick from this list and know that they're working on the right thing and have enough information to crack on. This is your execution. Your product backlog lives separately. It includes customer requests. It includes suggestions from the team, insights from experiments and prototypes, and more. It should be transparent. Your whole team can search and add to it. This is where you prototype and spec out ideas and connect them to objectives they're meant to hit. This backlog is key to your strategy. So split your backlog into these 2 parts to avoid having a beast of a backlog and not getting the best of either world. And as your product matures, experimentation gets scarier. We all know this build, measure, learn diagram. Now it seems simple. It is simple. That is, until you've got competition nipping at your heels, a growing base of customers asking for more and more, and tech debt creeping in at the edges. Your company enters panic mode, trying to shovel fixes and features out the door, and neglects to focus on anything but the build part. And it usually happens at the expense of other crucial parts, like actually measuring and learning, and end up with a build, build, build cycle. It's called the build trap. Like Stephen was referring back to Melissa Perry's work, she wrote an entire book on this that's highly recommended. You can get out of this trap. You need to create the time and space to validate the work that's being done. It's not that people in the team don't understand that it's important to move the right metrics. It's that they often don't have the permission and the time to stop building and actually do the measurements. So you can avoid the build trap by implementing some form of dual track agile. Now, there's a lot of ways of interpreting dual track agile, but the essence here is that you give figuring out what to build as much importance as the building process itself. So start with the discovery track to find out if a product idea is any good. Successful findings from the discovery track are added to the backlog of the delivery track. Now this depends as to whether you've got two separate teams or whether you are having a single team switching track each time. It doesn't matter, but the whole idea is that you're actually spending as much time on discovery as you are on delivery, so that you're not just focused entirely on that delivery. Having a dual track approach gives you permission to spend time in discovery instead of feeling the pressure to constantly deliver. And done well, this gives you the best combo of speed and learning. And I see a bad habit all the time. You've released something, so you close all the tickets in Jira, you crumple up all the sticky notes on the wall, and you start moving on to the next thing. And this might seem good for keeping up an agile cadence, but it's really bad for ensuring that you're actually solving problems and making an impact. After all, just because something was launched doesn't mean it actually solved the problem you wanted it to. So fortunately, your lean roadmap can help you here as well. Each card is a problem to be solved, and as we saw before, is tied to an objective. Each card is then connected to a list of experiments, and these experiments can be run in order to solve that problem and therefore impact that objective. And you can actually use your roadmap to give you an overview of progress on ongoing experiments. So once a project is done in development, don't just throw these results out or tuck them away somewhere you'll never find them again. Move them to a list of completed cards or some sort of validation roadmap. The purpose here is to give you a space to track what was released and when, and then outline the results. Did it solve the problem and move the metric you were hoping it would? By building this validation into your roadmap, you create a space to show the value of the work done. And it helps to remember that it's not your job to have all the answers. You're supposed to know less than your colleagues. Instead, focus on asking the best questions and creating a safe space for everyone to contribute. To really excel with experimentation, you need to build psychological safety. It's about making people feel more comfortable speaking up, reporting errors, and pitching in to help with the product. So how could you build this safety within your own team? I know a couple tweaks to your language that could help build this right environment. Phrase questions so they begin with, how might we? It turns the issue into a collective problem. It supposes instead of asserts, and it works really well in conjunction with, I bet. As a product manager, you're going to be wrong a lot. I bet gives you permission to fail and to try again. After all, it wasn't you that was wrong, it was your hypothesis. And now that you know what doesn't work, you're free to test the next bet. It's subtle, but these shifts in language set the stage for psychological safety. As any product matures, it starts to create a market that looks pretty tasty to anyone just starting up. If you're succeeded, you are about to be disrupted. I like to think about companies on this risk appetite scale. Most companies start off on one end of the scale. They don't have customers or tech debt. The founders have read lean startup and are ready to use it in anger. On the opposite end, you've got your giants, slow-moving companies pinned down by government regulations and obligations to existing stakeholders. Yet this usually translates to massive piles of cash for them. But the competitive field is always changing. Upstarts are always chewing away at the edges. Larger, slower companies need to be on the watch out, otherwise they'll be rendered obsolete. And the shift from nimble to slow is practically inevitable for any maturing product, but the most successful companies have found a way to compete with these upstarts. I call this one the Google. Now, Google is famous for their 20% time. They give their staff the equivalent of 1 day per week to work on whatever they like. Now, it might seem like a colossal waste of resources, but some of their core products like Gmail and Maps have come out of this. Some wasteful products have come out of this that didn't go anywhere as well. But a lot of their amazing products have come out of this. Now, 20% might seem way too much for a lot of companies, but perhaps you can try to carve out just 10% or 2% or 0.2% and see what comes out of it. And the hackathon is just as good for building disruptive products as it is for team building. In this method, give your team a time-boxed week of freedom to put together a simple product, to try to solve a simple problem. It could very well be the start of a new profitable business line that disrupts your existing business lines. The lab is an approach used by a lot of large enterprises, usually those going through some sort of digital transformation. The lab is a small division of a large company that looks and acts like a startup, but has the backing of their corporate parent giant to fuel the growth of any prototype that shows interest. And finally, the Facebook. Facebook has one of the largest user bases in the world, but they never release something to everyone at the same time. In fact, they can segment their users into tiny groups to test and release features to just one group at a time. So this removes the risk of launching and allows them to experiment way more readily as a result. So all of these are tactics that can help your company disrupt your own maturing product before it enters the decline stage. Your goal is to breathe new life into your maturing product by adding more value or expanding your market. If done right, you can extend your product's life and expand your revenues even further. So, beat the feature factory by ditching your timeline and focusing on solving real problems. Conquer that beast of a backlog by separating the strategic parts from the execution. Learn to love experimenting again by building in a safe place for validation. And figure out how to disrupt yourself before someone else does. And that is how you can grow up lean. Thank you very much. And as part of World Product Day, one thing that I'm doing today is a whole bunch of product mentoring sessions. So come say hello to me on Twitter or find my tweets. I've got a link where you can actually just book time with me either this evening, if you can grab a time tonight, or over the next few days or next couple of weeks. Hope to chat with you all today or take your questions as we are here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Janna. That is a very interesting presentation that you gave us.
Thank
we
you.
already have a couple of questions raised by the audience, if you don't mind. The first question is raised by Justin, is wondering how do you explain budgeting in the context of dual track?
Such a good question. I bet Stephen probably has thoughts on that as well. And I'm just going to turn the slides off as well, because we don't need that talking back at me as we sit here. Let's do that and that. There we go. Ta-da! Okay, great. Sorry for that, was a bit of a distraction. Really good question. So, and I actually ended up answering a similar question to this because somebody asked about it today in light of the fact that, with this COVID crisis, people are working less. Some people are in the UK, where some people are furloughed, and in other countries, they've got similar programs where people are working part-time or not at all. And therefore, things like discovery tend to fall by the wayside. And one thing I pointed out is that, as is the case, whether we're in a crisis or not, when teams are given the choice of spending time with discovery or delivery, they tend to spend their time in delivery. And I think that's because delivery feels like work, and the higher ups appreciate seeing the work. You can see delivery happening. You can see the releases, and you can see what's happening. You can see when a new feature comes out. And it is that little bit of a addiction that people have, that companies have, to new features coming out. And discovery tends to fall by the wayside. And so budgets never seem to ever appear for discovery. And it's been taken a long time to get to the point that product teams have kind of said, like, hey, we actually need to spend this time and the effort to go backwards up the chain and relearn this problem and throw out some of this work and everything else, right? Stephen was talking about some of the same problems in his talk. So I think the reality is that the budget is there if the company can understand the value that you actually do get out of discovery. And there is value in discovery, because this isn't 10 years ago where lean enterprise and lean startup was a new concept and this was unproven. We can now see the numbers from companies who have been operating in lean experimentation driven ways, massively outperforming others on indexes. You can see how companies like Netflix are eating the world alive compared to other companies because they are experimentation driven. So it's not, and they're not doing it by being IT project driven. They're doing it by being discovery driven. Unfortunately, it's very hard to make that case to companies who want to know exactly how your little discovery project is going to make them dollars in X days, because you can't really show that. One of the other things that I've always found a little bit baffling in companies is how, I think, unfair product teams have it, because I think that the buck has been passed to product teams, and we're kind of stuck with this. So hear me out. If you're in marketing, you know that half your marketing dollars are wasted. You just don't know which half, and they totally get away with that, right? That's fine. If you're in sales, no one is saying, show me your roadmap of which dollars are going to land and when. They have a pipeline of sales with what % likelihood these deals are, and that's how they forecast outwards. That's all we're asking for, is be able to say, hey, we want to be able to run X number of experiments. We want to be able to do these kind of things. And we think that if we do that, we're going to improve these kind of numbers in this direction. We can't tell you exactly what's going to launch and when, just like, Bob in sales can't tell you exactly which deal is going to land and how many dollars it's going to be. But we can tell you, if we follow this kind of process, it's going to start looking like this. And that is a better process than, mechanically just having people on the phone making calls, because that's old school and does not work. Just like having people sitting there mechanically typing out code and following old school specs does not work.
Sorry, I'm so going to use this example from now on. I'm just going to use it. Brilliant. Thank you. I think we have another couple of questions, if you're up for it.
Yeah.
How does a PM get focused in the roadmap when prioritizing by value impact on a large number of existing features, spreads development effort thinly over many initiatives? For example, peanut buttering. I didn't know this term existed.
Yeah.
So how does a PM get focused in the roadmap when prioritizing by value impact on a large number of existing features, spreading development over many initiatives? So it's about prioritization, I'm guessing.
I think one thing that's really misunderstood with prioritization is that a lot of people try to prioritize features. They try to prioritize at the individual feature or experiment level, when instead you should be prioritizing at the problem level, right? The roadmap shouldn't be made up of a list of features and due dates and stuff like that, because to be honest, in the grand scheme of things, no one actually cares as to whether feature A came out, second week of April and feature B came out third week in April. Anybody who's trying to get that level of control, it's not going to be healthy for the company. Instead, it should be, okay, so we solved this problem first, and that was April's problem, and then May's problem was this problem, and June's problem was this problem, right? And so you're thinking in a much larger but more impactful way. And that way, if your prioritization is wrong and like you solved the wrong problem in May, then it's a bigger problem, which is why you want to make sure that you're prioritizing at the problem level. But then you're not getting stuck into, I don't know, like stack ranking a whole bunch of little things, because it doesn't really matter. Once you actually know what your problem is, you then just focus on running as many experiments you can in the month of April and May to solve that problem, and finish when you actually have sufficiently gotten that problem solved, whether that takes 1 month or 2 months or whatever else. The whole thing about peanut buttering, if that concept is around the idea of spreading yourself thin, that kind of comes down to how the company wants to conduct itself. I mean, if problem A is in fact the biggest problem that it needs to solve, then it can choose as to whether it puts all of its efforts into solving that problem, or whether it wants to try to solve multiple problems at once. If you put everything all in one and you solve that one problem first, it'll be done faster. You tackle everything, put everything on that one thing, it'll be out of the way and you can move on to the next problem. I think too many teams try to take on too many big chunky initiatives, and it becomes more obvious when you start saying, well, we're going to work on this feature over here, and this feature over here, and this feature over here, and you got teams running off in different directions. Whereas if you're just like, actually, we're just going to try to solve the checkout conversion problem, everyone's like, okay, well, that all involves this chunk right here, and everyone's focused there. And that way, no one can really be spending time peanut buttering themselves thin over this way as much. I hope that helped answer the question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janna. Yeah, I think Stephen has a question to raise to Janna.
I can say it. I think I get the privilege of being able to say that loud rather than typing it as well, right? Janna, really interesting in that you're deliberately creating those environments within ProdPad. I'm wondering if there was any, I find in trying to create that environment as well, I think it can be really hard at times, and I find myself making bad decisions occasionally and then sort of ruining how I acted in those situations. So I know you need to start with the problem. I have talks about starting at the problem, but I still come up with a solution as a stakeholder and go, oh, this is the thing that I really want to build. Can you build this now? So how do you find that at ProdPad, and how do you, is there mistakes that you've made along the way, or how have you deliberately created that environment, and how has it been at ProdPad?
Oh God, I mean, I could never stand here and say that I've done everything right myself. Some people know that the first version of ProdPad was built with my own assumptions, using only my own research based on what I knew, and therefore I had to throw out the first version of ProdPad because I didn't look at the wider market. So I did the same thing, going, oh, I don't need to talk to my users. I am my user, so I'll just build what I need. So fortunately, I learned those lessons very early on and learned to talk to users. Nowadays, obviously, I surround myself with product people, and most of the team is made up of people who've been in product. And so we, obviously it's like an in-joke of asking the question, like, what problem are you trying to solve? And how might we go about solving this? And I bet. And so we very much catch each other when we're trying to jump into solutioneering and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with jumping into a solution mode if you've got something that you want to pitch out there as this is one way to do it. But then it's like, okay, so how do we check that we're not falling in love with this solution, right? So if we didn't do this, what would happen? Or what are different ways we might do this, right? And so we use Teresa Torres's opportunity solution tree a lot, which maps really well with our format of the roadmap. So the roadmap essentially shows off different experiments we're going to run, which is very similar to her, the little bubbles that you see. So you can see that you don't just have one solution to every problem. Our roadmap has multiple experiments we're going to run for each desired outcome or each problem we want to solve. And so we never got caught out with the whole, oh, well, you know, Janna came up with this idea, let's go build. It's, oh, there's this thing, but here's how we're going to test it. Here's how we're going to take a step back. And we do a very deep discovery side of things. We've got a product team who does, we're very lucky because we've got customers who love our discovery process and love getting involved with it and giving us feedback. And, you know, that really helps us before we jump into anything as well.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Do we have time for one more? Janna, is that okay?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry.
Great. No worries. So Robert is asking, I have used roadmaps to get buy-in. How do you get stakeholders to stop expecting to see updated roadmaps?
Oh, there's so much context hidden away in that question. I feel your pain, Robert. So roadmaps to get, so one of the problems with the roadmaps is that they have changed over time, and the expectations of what roadmaps have changed, what roadmaps are, have changed over time. Because in the old days, and even I was guilty of this, roadmaps used to be feature-based timeline Gantt chart things. And they were there to show what things you were going to build and when. And I used to build them like that, and I'd show them to stakeholders, my boss and my board and my team, and I'd get a little pat on the head and he'd say, yep, great, go deliver. And when I didn't deliver that, I'd get in trouble, right? I'd look like the idiot who didn't know how to deliver things. And I just sort of assumed that every other product manager knew how to deliver this stuff, and I was just terrible at my job. And it wasn't until I started hanging out with lots more product managers that I realized that no one delivers roadmaps on time. That's not how this works. And so maybe roadmaps are broken. So roadmaps nowadays are much more focused on validating your assumptions about the problems that are coming up, and they can add huge value. So there was a whole swing in the market where people went, oh, well, roadmaps, if I can't have timelines, we'll just have no roadmaps. But it meant that teams didn't have the alignment, right? They didn't know what it was they're building, and therefore anything they built was the right thing, but you just end up with a hodgepodge of stuff, which was no good, right? And so roadmaps now should be around making sure people are pointing in the right direction, but aren't a list of all the things they should go do. Now, when stakeholders are asking for updated maps, that's okay, right? Because the roadmap isn't telling them what day something's going to be done. It's not showing them anything that they can't give you feedback on. An updated roadmap is no different than them seeing the latest sketch drawing or the latest Marvel prototype of something, and if they want to give you feedback on it and say, oh, actually that's not how I envisioned it, that's we actually thought that the feature was going to be more like this, you can take that feedback or not, right? It's good to get feedback on a prototype. Getting feedback on your roadmap is really healthy, because if you were to show that to somebody on, you know, the exec team, and they say, oh, we haven't thought about this major problem that we're going to have, or, you know, we're going to run out of funding by that time, you're like, oh, actually we should probably know about that problem and change our roadmap accordingly. It's there for you to check your problems and make sure you can adjust to them before they become closer up problems that you really have to deal with. So don't be afraid of sharing your roadmap, as long as you pared your roadmap down to things that you want to check with the wider stakeholder group. So, you know, you might have a version that you check with your customers, a version that you check with internal team, and a version that you check with execs, for example. I just see Robert jumping in there with a follow-up question, like shorter timeframes. So I think another thing to point out is that you want to separate your release planning stuff from your longer term roadmap stuff. This is one of the problems where roadmaps has gotten really convoluted, is that people went, well, I can release, you know, this, and this in this sprint, and this and this in this sprint, and that's what's going to happen next sprint. And therefore I should just be able to show the next 10 sprints, and all of a sudden you have this big long roadmap of all these things that are going to happen. But like, you were kind of making it up for sprint 1, kind of making it up for sprint 2, definitely making it up for sprint 3, and by the time you got to sprint 10, you were definitely making it up, right? So like, only show like the release plan Only show the stuff that you definitely know that you're like planning on, like reasonably planning on sticking to, and keep your release plan to that, right? And that's okay to show people, because your developers and various people do need to know what you're planning on releasing. That is a separate document. That is a release plan. It's a project plan there to inform people what is literally in flow in your development backlog, which is why I want to keep that backlog separate. Your product roadmap is a completely different document. It's a strategic document. It's there to communicate the wider plan. And so it doesn't include those tiny little release stuff. And so it takes that and sort of stretches it out to say, like, well, here's what we're working on now, next, and later. And that could be 2 years stretch. And it doesn't even try to show the micro stuff. It just sort of shows the bigger picture. And so if you take that step back and look at it from that much bigger piece, you can get a lot more value out of your roadmap. So have a separate release plan from your roadmap, so you can get value out of both and have two different sets of conversations around both.
Thank you so much. I think this answered the question. And it's a wrap for today.
Yep.
It was really great to have you guys. We really appreciate. It was a great kickoff, and more to come.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Chris, do you want to add something?
No, thank you very much. It has been a very wonderful event we had on World Product Day. So thank you very much for making the time to join us. And it was a pleasure to have you.
And thank you
And
so much.
thanks for people who dialed in. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
See you
Thank you very
soon.
much.
Bye.
Bye.